How do you explain recognizing someone you haven't seen in 30 years through their dementia-confused memories? Jennifer Martinez stood frozen in room 217, listening to her new patient Robert Sullivan ramble about a little girl named Jenny who loved strawberry ice cream and had a stuffed rabbit named Mr. Hoppy. These were details no one should know, private memories from Jennifer's childhood before her father abandoned her. As she helped this elderly stranger with his evening routine, fragments of his confused speech began forming an impossible picture. Robert Sullivan was Robert Martinez, her missing father, and his deteriorating mind was finally confessing to the abandonment he'd hidden for 3 decades. The morning sun filtered through the windows of Sunset Grove Nursing Home as Jennifer Martinez prepared for another 12-hour shift. At 37, she had been working as a certified nursing assistant for 12 years, the last 5 spent at this upscale facility that catered to elderly patients whose families could afford the best care available. Jennifer took pride in her work. In a profession where burnout was common and turnover high, she had developed a reputation for patience, compassion, and an almost intuitive understanding of her patients' needs. She could read the subtle signs of discomfort in patients who could no longer communicate clearly, could anticipate problems before they became emergencies, and had a gentle way of maintaining dignity for people who had lost control over most aspects of their lives. "You're early again," said Patricia, the night shift supervisor, as Jennifer signed in at the nurse's station. "You know you don't get paid for those extra 15 minutes. "I know," Jennifer replied with a smile. But Mrs. Chun in 304 liked her morning tea at exactly 6:45, and Mr. Rodriguez in 118 gets anxious if there's too much change in routine. "Starting early helps me give them consistency." Patricia shook her head with affection. "You're too good for this job, Jennifer. You should have gone to nursing school, become an RN. You've got the skills and the heart for it." It was a conversation they'd had many times before. Jennifer had considered nursing school, had even been accepted to a program 7 years ago. But life had a way of getting complicated. Her husband Miguel's construction accident had left him partially disabled, requiring surgery and months of physical therapy. Her daughter Sophia had needed braces and eventually college tuition, and her son David's learning disabilities required expensive tutoring that insurance didn't cover. The nursing assistant salary wasn't much, but it was steady, and the evening and night shifts paid slightly better. Jennifer had become an expert at stretching every dollar and making ends meet through careful planning and sacrifice. She'd learned these skills early, during her years in the foster care system, and they'd serve her well in building the stable life she'd always dreamed of having. What Jennifer didn't talk about, even with colleagues she'd known for years, was her childhood before the foster system. Most people at Sunset Grove knew she'd grown up in foster care, but they assumed it was due to parental death or some tragic but conventional circumstance. Jennifer let them believe what they wanted, finding it easier than explaining the truth about her father's abandonment. The memory was still vivid after 30 years. She'd been 7 years old, traveling with her father Robert Martinez across the country after her mother died of cancer. They'd stopped at a highway rest area somewhere in Nevada, and her father had told her to wait on a bench while he used the restroom and got them snacks for the road. Jennifer had waited for hours, clutching her stuffed rabbit Mr. Hoppy, watching the sun set and the parking lot empty out. Eventually, a kind woman had noticed her sitting alone and called the police. By the time officers arrived, Jennifer had already read the note her father had left in her backpack. "I can't do this anymore. I'm sorry. You deserve better than I can give you." The foster care system had taken her in that night, and Jennifer Martinez had spent the next 11 years moving between homes, never quite belonging anywhere, always wondering why her father had decided she wasn't worth keeping. But Jennifer had refused to let abandonment define her entire life. She'd graduated high school despite the instability, had gotten her CNA certification, had married Miguel, and built a family that would never abandon each other the way she'd been abandoned. Her children would never wonder if they were wanted. Her husband would never question her commitment. The life Jennifer had built was modest but genuine. They lived in a small house in a working-class neighborhood, drove old cars that Miguel kept running through skill and determination, and counted every penny. But they had what Jennifer had always craved as a child: consistency, love, and the security of knowing they belonged to each other. As Jennifer began her morning rounds, checking on patients and helping them with breakfast routines, she pushed thoughts of her childhood aside. The past was done, and there was no point dwelling on a father who had probably died years ago or lived somewhere far away, never thinking about the little girl he'd left behind. Room 304. Mrs. Chun was already awake, sitting in her chair and looking out the window at the courtyard garden. Jennifer brought her tea and toast, chatted about the weather and the birds of the feeder outside, helped her with her morning medications. Room 118. Mr. Rodriguez needed help getting to the bathroom and getting dressed. Jennifer maintained his dignity throughout, talking to him like the retired professor he'd been rather than treating him like a child who needed constant supervision. Room 156. Mrs. Kowalski wanted to tell Jennifer about her dream from the previous night, convinced it was actually a memory from her youth in Poland. Jennifer listened patiently, knowing that for dementia patients, the line between memory and imagination often blurred. This was Jennifer's world, helping people maintain whatever quality of life remained in their final years, providing comfort and care to those whose own children were often too busy or too distant to be present. She understood abandonment in ways that made her especially suited to working with the elderly who spent days waiting for visits that rarely came. At the morning staff meeting, the director of nursing announced a new admission. Robert Sullivan, 72 years old, advanced dementia with occasional lucid periods. He was found wandering on Highway 95 3 days ago, confused and unable to provide information about his identity. Police eventually identified him through fingerprints. He has a minor criminal record from decades ago. Nothing serious. No family has been located yet. He's being transferred here from the hospital this afternoon, and he'll be in room 217. Jennifer felt a small pang of sadness at the description. Another elderly person with no family, no one to advocate for them or sit with them during their final decline. These were often the patients Jennifer felt most drawn to, perhaps because she understood what it meant to be alone in the world. Jennifer, the director said, "I'm assigning him to you as primary caregiver. You're good with the confused ones, and this patient is going to need someone patient and consistent." "Of course," Jennifer replied. "What's his baseline cognitive status?" "Moderate to severe impairment. He has moments of clarity, but mostly seems trapped in memories from decades ago. Sometimes he thinks it's 1985. Sometimes he's looking for his daughter, who he says is 7 years old. Typical dementia presentation with time disorientation." Jennifer nodded, making notes about the new patient. Caring for someone with dementia required understanding their internal reality rather than constantly correcting them about the actual date or circumstances. If Mr. Sullivan thought it was 1985 and he had a young daughter, Jennifer would work within that framework rather than causing distress by insisting on current reality. The rest of the morning passed in the usual routine of medications, meals, and personal care. Jennifer helped feed patients who could no longer manage utensils, changed bedding, assisted with physical therapy exercises, and provided the countless small acts of service that made up her day. At 2 p.m., an ambulance arrived with Robert Sullivan. Jennifer met the paramedics at the entrance, helping guide the stretcher through the hallways to room 217. The patient was thin and frail, his white hair uncombed, his face showing the confusion common in advanced dementia patients who find themselves in unfamiliar surroundings. "Hello, Mr. Sullivan," Jennifer said gently as they transferred him to the bed. "My name is Jennifer, and I'm going to be taking care of you. You're at Sunset Grove Nursing Home, and you're safe here." The man's eyes were distant and unfocused, scanning the room without seeming to recognize anything. He muttered something Jennifer couldn't quite hear. "What was that, Mr. Sullivan?" she asked, leaning closer. "Not Sullivan," he mumbled. "Martinez. My name is Martinez." Jennifer's hands paused for just a moment as she adjusted his blankets. Martinez wasn't an uncommon name, especially in their area. Probably just confusion or a previous marriage that predated his current legal name. "That's fine," Jennifer said soothingly. "We'll call you whatever name makes you comfortable. Can you tell me your first name?" "Robert," he said with more certainty. Robert Martinez. I'm looking for my daughter. Have you seen Jenny? Little Jenny with the rabbit? Jennifer felt something cold settle in her stomach, but she pushed it aside. Dementia patients often talked about children, especially those they'd been separated from. It was just coincidence that this man's confused memories included a daughter named Jenny. Let's get you settled in, Jennifer said, maintaining her professional composure. Are you comfortable? Can I get you anything? Robert's eyes suddenly focused on her face with unexpected clarity. You look like her, he said. Like Jenny's mother, Elena. She had her eyes. Jennifer's hands were shaking now, but she forced herself to continue the intake process. Her mother's name had been Elena. That was in the foster care records, not a secret. Just another coincidence. But as Jennifer helped Robert change into comfortable clothes and got him situated in his new room, he kept returning to the same confused narrative. He talked about driving across the country with his little girl after his wife died. He mentioned stopping at rest areas and gas stations. He described a stuffed rabbit named Mr. Hoppy. These were details from Jennifer's childhood, specific, private details that no one should know unless they'd been there. Mr. Sullivan, Jennifer said carefully, when you talk about your daughter Jenny, how old was she? 7, Robert said with surprising certainty. She just turned 7. Loves strawberry ice cream. Loves her Mr. Hoppy rabbit. Smart little girl, always asking questions. Jennifer had to sit down. She pulled a chair close to Robert's bed, her mind racing through impossible possibilities. Mr. Sullivan, or Martinez, where did you lose track of your daughter? Robert's face crumpled with confusion and distress. I don't know. I can't remember. Sometimes I think it was yesterday. Sometimes it feels like forever ago. I left her somewhere safe. I wrote her a note. I told her I was sorry. The room seemed to tilt around Jennifer. She was listening to her father, the man who had abandoned her 30 years ago, confessing to the very abandonment that had defined her entire life. But he was confused, lost in the fog of dementia, mixing up timelines and unable to distinguish past from present. Sir, Jennifer said, her voice barely steady. I need to ask you something. What year do you think it is? Robert looked at her blankly. 1993? No, that's not right. Jenny's birthday is coming up. She'll be 8 soon. Or maybe she's already grown up. I can't remember. The doctors say I can't remember things right. Jennifer stood up, needing to step away before she lost her composure completely. I need to check on other patients, she said. I'll be back soon to help you with dinner. She walked quickly to the staff bathroom and locked herself in a stall, trying to control her breathing. This couldn't be happening. Her father couldn't have just been admitted as her patient after 3 decades of absence. It was too impossible, too cruel a coincidence. But the details were too specific to be coincidence. The daughter named Jenny, the stuffed rabbit Mr. Hoppy, the strawberry ice cream, the note of apology. These were pieces of Jennifer's personal history that no stranger could know. Jennifer pulled out her phone and searched for information about Robert Martinez and Robert Sullivan. What she found made her stomach drop. Robert Martinez had legally changed his name to Robert Sullivan in 1995, 2 years after abandoning Jennifer. There were sparse records after that. A few minor arrests for vagrancy and public intoxication, a pattern of instability and homelessness that suggested addiction or mental health problems. Her father had spent the last 30 years as a homeless drifter, eventually developing dementia that had erased most of his memories, but somehow preserved the guilt about abandoning his daughter. Over the next several days, Jennifer continued caring for Robert Sullivan while wrestling with the devastating knowledge of who he really was. She told no one at work about her suspicions, uncertain how to explain that she might be caring for the father who had abandoned her 3 decades ago. Robert's dementia followed an unpredictable pattern. Sometimes he was completely lost, unable to remember his own name or recognize his surroundings. Other times he had moments of surprising clarity where fragments of genuine memory emerged from the confusion. Jennifer found herself both dreading and anticipating these lucid moments. Part of her wanted answers to questions she'd carried for 30 years. Why'd he left her? Had he ever regretted it? Had he thought about her over the decades? But another part of her wanted to maintain professional distance, to care for this patient without the emotional complication of their shared history. It would be easier to think of him as just another elderly dementia patient, rather than as the father whose abandonment had shaped her entire life. The decision was taken out of her hands during an evening shift 3 days after Robert's admission. Jennifer was helping him with dinner, patiently guiding the spoon to his mouth as his hands shook too much to manage it himself. "You're very kind," Robert said suddenly, his voice clearer than she'd heard before. "My Jenny would have grown up to be kind like you. I wonder if she became a nurse, taking care of people. She always wanted to help people." Jennifer's hand stopped halfway to his mouth. "Tell me about Jenny," she said carefully. "What do you remember about her?" Robert's eyes focused on something far away. "She had dark hair, always in pigtails. She loved books. I used to read to her every night. After her mother died, it was just the two of us. I tried to be both parents, but I was so lost. Elena had been the strong one, the one who kept us all together." "What happened after Elena died?" Jennifer asked, knowing she was crossing professional boundaries but unable to stop herself. "I fell apart," Robert admitted, his lucidity making the confession more painful. "Started drinking to numb the grief. Lost my job, lost our apartment. I convinced myself I was taking Jenny on an adventure, traveling the country to find a new start. But really I was just running away from responsibility. And then," Jennifer prompted, "then I left her." Robert's voice broke. "At a rest stop somewhere. I can't even remember exactly where anymore. I told myself she'd be better off with someone who could actually take care of her, that the state would find her a good family. I was a coward who took the easy way out." Jennifer set down the spoon, tears streaming down her face despite her attempts at professional composure. "Mr. Sullivan. Martinez," he corrected firmly. "Robert Martinez. I changed my name because I was ashamed of who I was, but that's my real name. That's who Jenny's father was." "Robert," Jennifer said softly, "what did the note say?" "The one you left for Jenny." He looked at her in surprise. "How did you know about the note? Just tell me what it said. I can't do this anymore. I'm sorry. You deserve better than I can give you." Robert recited the words from memory, tears now running down his weathered face. "I've remembered those words every day for 30 years. I've hated myself for writing them." Jennifer reached out and took his hand. "The little girl you left," she read that note. She kept it for years, actually trying to understand why her father didn't want her. Robert looked at her with growing confusion and hope. "You know her? You know what happened to my Jenny?" "I am Jenny," Jennifer said, her voice shaking. "I'm your daughter. I'm the little girl you left at that rest stop 30 years ago." Robert stared at her, his mind clearly struggling to process this information across the fog of dementia. No. Jenny is 7. She's a little girl with pigtails and a stuffed rabbit. You're a grown woman. I was 7 when you left me," Jennifer explained gently. "That was 1993. It's 2023 now. I'm 37 years old. I grew up, graduated high school, became a nursing assistant. I have a husband and 2 children. And through some impossible coincidence, you were admitted here as my patient." Robert's face cycled through disbelief, recognition, and devastating grief. "Jenny? My little Jenny?" "Yes, Daddy. It's me." What happened next would stay with Jennifer forever. Robert Martinez, this broken man whose dementia had stripped away most of his memories and defenses, began to sob with a grief that seemed to come from 3 decades of accumulated guilt and loss. "I'm so sorry," he kept repeating. "I'm so sorry, Jenny. I'm so sorry." Jennifer found herself holding her father for the first time in 30 years, comforting him even as her own heart was breaking from the weight of their shared history. This wasn't the reunion she'd imagined during her years in foster care. No joyful recognition, no satisfying answers to all her questions. Just 2 damaged people holding each other across 3 decades of abandonment and loss. After that evening's revelation, Jennifer's work at Sunset Grove became infinitely more complicated. She informed her supervisor about her relationship to Robert, expecting to be taken off his care team to avoid the conflict of interest. But the director of nursing, after consulting with the facility's ethics committee, made a different decision. Given Mr. Sullivan's advanced dementia and lack of any other family, and given your professional training and obvious dedication to his well-being, we're going to allow you to continue as his primary caregiver, if you're willing. However, we'll have another CNA check in regularly, and you'll meet weekly with our staff counselor to process the emotional impact. Jennifer agreed, partly because she couldn't bear the thought of someone else caring for her father now that she'd found him, and partly because she needed to understand what had happened in the 30 years since he'd left her. Robert's lucid moments became Jennifer's opportunities to piece together the story of his life after abandonment. The picture that emerged was heartbreaking in its predictability. After leaving Jennifer at the rest stop, Robert had continued driving aimlessly for several weeks, drinking heavily to suppress the guilt. He'd eventually crashed the car in Utah and been arrested for DUI. In jail, he'd hit bottom, experiencing withdrawal and facing the reality of what he'd done. Upon release, Robert had tried to find Jennifer, but by then she was lost in the foster care system with sealed records. His criminal record and history of alcoholism made it impossible to get information about her placement. Caseworkers had told him that Jennifer was safe and better off without him, that pursuing contact would only disrupt her healing. So Robert had drifted, working odd jobs when he could, struggling with alcoholism and depression, carrying the guilt of his abandonment like a weight he couldn't set down. He'd legally changed his name to Robert Sullivan, partly to escape his past, and partly because he felt he didn't deserve to keep the name his daughter shared. The years had blurred together in a cycle of temporary jobs, cheap motels, homeless shelters, and occasional arrests for minor offenses. Robert had essentially disappeared from society, becoming one of the invisible homeless people that others walk past without seeing. The dementia had started slowly in his late 60s, beginning with minor forgetfulness and gradually progressing to the severe impairment he showed now. The confusion and memory loss had actually provided some mercy, softening the sharp edges of his guilt by making past and present blur together. Jennifer listened to these fragments of his story, feeling a complicated mix of anger, pity, and sadness. The father she'd imagined over the years had been either a monster who callously abandoned her or a man who'd been forced by circumstances beyond his control to give her up. The reality was more mundane and more heartbreaking. Just a weak man who'd made a terrible choice and spent the rest of his life paying for it. "Do you ever wish you'd made a different choice?" Jennifer asked during one of their conversations. "Every day," Robert replied in a rare moment of clarity. "But I can't change it. I can't go back and be the father you needed. All I can do is live with what I did." Jennifer began bringing photos from her life to show Robert during his lucid periods. Pictures of her high school graduation, her wedding to Miguel, her children Sophia and David. She wanted him to see that despite his abandonment, she'd built a good life. "You did well," Robert said, studying a photo of Jennifer's family. "You became the kind of person who helps others, who builds a family. You didn't let what I did destroy you." "It almost did," Jennifer admitted. "There were years when I was so angry, so hurt. I struggled to trust anyone. Miguel had to work hard to convince me that love didn't always end in abandonment. I'm sorry you had to learn that lesson so young. I'm sorry you never got to know your grandchildren." They sat in silence for a moment, contemplating all the lost years between them. Jennifer also had to navigate how to explain this situation to her own family. Miguel knew the basics of her childhood abandonment, but had never pushed for details. Her children knew she'd grown up in foster care, but didn't know the full story. Telling them that she'd found her biological father, that he was dying of dementia at her workplace, that she'd been caring for him without knowing who he was, it was a conversation Jennifer dreaded. She started with Miguel, explaining everything one evening after the kids were in bed. Her husband listened quietly, then held her while she cried. "What do you want to do?" he asked. "How can I support you through this?" "I don't know," Jennifer admitted. "Part of me wants to refuse to see him, to let him die alone like he left me alone. But another part of me needs to understand him, to hear his story before he's gone completely." "Then take the time you need," Miguel said, "and let me know how I can help." Telling Sophia and David was harder. At 15 and 12, they were old enough to understand but young enough to be confused by the complexity of adult relationships and forgiveness. "So the man who abandoned you is your patient?" Sophia asked, trying to wrap her mind around the situation. "Yes. And you're taking care of him, even though he left you?" "Yes." "Why?" David asked. "Why would you help someone who hurt you?" It was a fair question, one Jennifer had been asking herself. "Because he's a sick old man who needs help, and because I'm a nursing assistant who helps people, and maybe because I need to understand what happened before I can truly move forward." "Are you going to forgive him?" Sophia asked. "I don't know yet," Jennifer answered honestly. "I'm working on it." As weeks passed, Robert's dementia progressed rapidly. The lucid moments became rarer, the confusion more constant. There would be days when he didn't recognize Jennifer at all, when he called her by other names or seemed frightened by her presence. On those days, Jennifer had to care for him with pure professionalism, providing physical care while receiving no emotional recognition in return. It was a strange kind of torture to have found her father after 30 years only to watch his mind disappear before they could truly reconcile. But there were still good days, moments of clarity that became precious to Jennifer because she knew they were numbered. During these times, Robert would tell her stories about her mother Elena, filling in gaps in Jennifer's memory. "Your mother was the bravest person I ever knew," Robert said one afternoon. "When she got her cancer diagnosis, she didn't fall apart. She made plans, arranged everything, tried to prepare me to be a single father. She believed in me more than I ever believed in myself." "Tell me about her," Jennifer urged, hungry for details about the mother she barely remembered. "She loved to sing, even though she was terrible at it. She made up silly songs about everyday things, doing laundry, cooking dinner, getting ready for bed. You used to laugh at her songs, and that made her so happy." Jennifer found herself crying at this detail. She'd completely forgotten her mother's silly songs. "She wanted you to know that you were loved," Robert continued. "Even when she was very sick, she would read to you and play with you. She made your childhood magical for as long as she could. And then she died, and you couldn't cope." "I failed both of you," Robert admitted. "Elena trusted me to take care of you, and I couldn't do it. I was so broken by her loss that I couldn't see past my own grief to take care of yours." These conversations were healing in their own painful way. Jennifer was learning that her father's abandonment, while inexcusable, came from weakness rather than malice. He'd been a broken man who made a terrible choice, not a monster who never cared. Jennifer also witnessed how Robert's dementia affected his relationship with other staff and patients. On his confused days, he could be agitated and difficult, calling out for Jenny or Elena, sometimes trying to leave the facility to find his daughter. The other CNAs would handle him with professional patience, but without the emotional understanding that Jennifer brought. She understood that when he called for Jenny, he was calling for her, even if his confused mind couldn't connect the grown woman caring for him with the 7-year-old he remembered. "He's lucky to have you," Patricia observed one day. "Most of our patients with no family just fade away, but he has someone who understands him." Jennifer nodded, but didn't elaborate. Some of the staff knew about her relationship to Robert, but she kept the details private. It was easier than explaining the complicated mix of resentment and compassion she felt. As Robert's condition worsened, the facility's hospice team became involved. The dementia had progressed to the point where he was no longer eating well, was mostly bedridden, and showed signs that his body was beginning to shut down. Dr. Patel, the hospice physician, estimated he had perhaps weeks left, maybe a month or two at most. "Given his lack of legal family, you'll need to make decisions about his care," Dr. Patel told Jennifer. "Do you want aggressive medical intervention if he has a crisis? Or are we focusing on comfort care?" It was a responsibility Jennifer had never expected to have, making end-of-life decisions for the father who had abandoned her. In a twisted way, she was finally getting to be his caregiver, to make the kind of parental decisions for him that he'd failed to make for her. Comfort care, Jennifer decided. No heroic measures. Just keep him comfortable and pain-free. "That's a kind choice," Dr. Patel said. Many people in your situation might choose differently. Jennifer understood what he meant. She could have chosen to let Robert suffer, to withhold compassionate care as punishment for his abandonment. But that would have made her cruel in ways she refused to become. He made a terrible mistake 30 years ago, Jennifer said. But he's still a human being who deserves dignity in death. As Robert's final days approached, Jennifer requested time off from her other responsibilities to focus solely on his care. The facility accommodated her request, understanding the unique circumstances. Jennifer spent hours sitting with Robert, talking to him even when she wasn't sure he could understand. She told him about her life, the struggles in foster care, meeting Miguel, having her children, becoming a nursing assistant. She wanted him to know that his abandonment hadn't destroyed her, that she'd survived and built something good. On his increasingly rare lucid days, Robert would respond to these stories with a mix of pride and regret. "I wish I could have been there," he'd say. "I wish I could have walked you down the aisle, held your babies, been a real father and grandfather." "So do I," Jennifer would reply honestly. But she also found herself sharing things she'd never told anyone. The anger and abandonment issues she'd struggled with, the difficulty trusting people, the years of therapy to work through her childhood trauma. "I blamed myself for a long time," Jennifer admitted. "I thought I must have done something wrong, must have been too difficult or not lovable enough. It took me years to understand that your choice was about your weakness, not my worth." "I'm sorry you ever doubted your worth," Robert said, tears streaming down his face. "You were always worthy of love. You were always enough. I was the one who wasn't enough." These conversations, painful as they were, brought a kind of closure that Jennifer hadn't known she needed. She was finally able to ask the questions that had haunted her childhood and receive honest, if heartbreaking, answers. Jennifer also brought Sophia and David to meet their grandfather during one of his better days. She'd explained the situation to them and left the choice up to them whether they wanted to meet him. Both kids agreed, curious about this grandfather they'd never known existed. Robert was having a relatively good day when they visited, clear enough to understand who they were and what they represented. "You're Jenny's children," he said, studying their faces. "I'm your grandfather, though I never earned that title." Sophia, protective of her mother, was initially standoffish. But David, with the directness of a 12-year-old, asked the question they were both thinking. "Why did you leave my mom?" Robert didn't flinch from the question. "Because I was weak and scared and broken. Because I convinced myself she'd be better off without me. I was wrong about everything, and I've regretted it every day since." "Did you ever try to find her?" Sophia asked. "I tried, but I failed at that too. By the time I got sober enough to really look, your mom was lost in the foster system, and I had no legal right to information about her." The kids stayed for about an hour, asking questions and getting to know this dying stranger who was technically family. Jennifer watched the interaction with mixed emotions, grateful her children were getting to meet Robert, but sad for all the years of relationship they'd missed. After the kids left, Robert turned to Jennifer with exhausted gratitude. "Thank you for bringing them. Thank you for letting them know I existed. They needed to meet you," Jennifer said. "They needed to understand where they come from, even the complicated parts." Miguel also visited, shaking Robert's hand with quiet formality. "You hurt my wife badly," Miguel said. "But she's choosing to forgive you, so I'll respect that choice." "I don't deserve her forgiveness," Robert replied. "No," Miguel agreed. "But she's giving it anyway because that's who she is." In his final week, Robert was mostly unresponsive, drifting in and out of consciousness. Jennifer stayed by his bedside during her shifts and even on her days off, wanting to be there when the end came. She read to him from books she remembered from childhood, played music that her mother used to sing, and held his hand through the long hours of waiting. "I forgive you," she whispered during one of these vigils. "I don't know if you can hear me, but I forgive you. Not because you deserve it, but because I need to let go of the anger I've carried all these years." On a quiet Tuesday morning, with sunlight streaming through the window and Jennifer holding his hand, Robert Martinez took his last breath. After 72 years of life marked by love, loss, mistakes, and regret, he died peacefully with his daughter beside him. Jennifer sat with his body for a long time, feeling the finality of death and the strange completion of a journey that had started 30 years ago at a highway rest stop. She'd found her father, heard his story, and said goodbye, something she'd never expected to have the chance to do. Planning Robert's funeral forced Jennifer to confront the question of how to honor a man whose life had been defined by both love and abandonment. He'd left no will, no instructions, and no money for burial expenses. Jennifer used her savings to arrange a simple funeral, feeling it was the right thing to do, even though Robert probably didn't deserve such consideration. A handful of people attended: Jennifer's family, a few staff members from Sunset Grove, and surprisingly, a social worker named Margaret Shun who had briefly worked Robert's case decades ago. "I remember him," Margaret said. "He came to our office once trying to find information about his daughter. We couldn't help him because of privacy laws, but I never forgot how broken he looked. I'm glad he found her at the end, even if it happened this way." During the small service, Jennifer gave a eulogy that was honest about Robert's failures while acknowledging his humanity. "My father made a terrible choice that affected the rest of both our lives," she said. "He abandoned me when I needed him most, and that abandonment shaped my childhood in painful ways. But he also lived with the consequences of that choice every day for 30 years. He never escaped his guilt, never stopped regretting what he'd done. Through circumstances I can only call providential, I was given the chance to care for him at the end of his life. I got to hear his story, understand his weakness, and ultimately forgive him. Not because he earned forgiveness, but because holding on to anger was hurting me more than it was hurting him. My father taught me 2 important lessons. First, that we're all capable of terrible mistakes that can't be undone. And second, that it's never too late to choose compassion over bitterness, even when bitterness feels justified." After the funeral, Jennifer felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in years. The chapter of her life, defined by abandonment and questions, had finally closed. She understood now what had happened and why, and she'd made the choice to forgive. The experience also changed how Jennifer approached her work at Sunset Grove. She found herself even more patient with difficult patients, even more aware that everyone had a story that explained their behavior. The elderly man who was rude to staff might be dealing with his own regrets and failures. The woman who cried for children who never visited might have her own history of complicated relationships. Jennifer started volunteering to take on the patients that other CNAs found too difficult. The ones with no family, the ones whose dementia made them aggressive or uncooperative. She understood that beneath the difficult behavior was often a lifetime of pain and regret. "You've changed since your father died," Patricia observed a few months later. "You were always compassionate, but now there's something else. Understanding, maybe." "I learned that hurt people," Jennifer replied, "and that sometimes the most difficult patients are the ones carrying the heaviest burdens." Jennifer also became more open with Sophia and David about her childhood, using Robert's story as a teaching moment about addiction, mental health, and the importance of asking for help when struggling. "Your grandfather wasn't a bad person," she explained. "He was a broken person who made bad choices. There's a difference. Bad people don't care about the damage they cause. Broken people care, but can't find their way to better choices." "Do you really forgive him?" Sophia asked. "I'm working on it every day," Jennifer answered honestly. "Forgiveness isn't a one-time decision. It's a choice I keep making, to let go of anger and choose understanding instead." The experience also deepened Jennifer's relationship with Miguel. He'd watched her navigate the complicated emotions of finding and losing her father, supporting her through grief that was mixed with relief, anger that coexisted with compassion. "I'm proud of you," Miguel told her one evening. "Not everyone could have done what you did, care for someone who hurt them so badly." "I couldn't have done it without you," Jennifer replied. "You showed me what real love looks like, what commitment means. That made it possible for me to extend grace to my father." A year after Robert's death, Jennifer was sorting through the few belongings he'd left behind, clothes that had been donated, a few personal items that the nursing home had stored. Among his possessions was a worn envelope containing old photographs. Jennifer opened the envelope with shaking hands and found pictures she'd never seen before. Photos of her as a baby, held by her mother, Elena. Pictures of her second birthday party, her first day of kindergarten, family moments she didn't remember having. Her father had kept these pictures through 30 years of homelessness and instability, carrying evidence of the family he'd destroyed. They'd probably been all he had left of a life he'd abandoned. Jennifer added these photos to her own family albums, giving Sophia and David glimpses of grandparents they'd never known. She told them stories about Elena that Robert had shared during his lucid moments, keeping alive the memory of a woman who had loved fiercely and died too young. The experience of caring for her dying father, as painful as it had been, became a gift in unexpected ways. Jennifer had closure on her abandonment, understanding about her father's humanity and freedom from decades of anger. She'd transformed a tragedy into something redemptive by choosing compassion over bitterness. 5 years after Robert's death, Jennifer was promoted to supervisor at Sunset Grove. She used her position to advocate for patients with no family support, ensuring they received dignity and care even when there was no one to fight for them. She also started a support group at the facility for staff members who were dealing with complicated family relationships with elderly relatives. Her own experience gave her unique insight into the emotional challenges of caring for family members who had hurt you, disappointed you, or abandoned you. The thing about working with elderly parents, Jennifer would tell the group, is that we're often caring for people who weren't there for us. They might have been absent, abusive, or just inadequate, but now they're vulnerable and need us. How do we navigate that? Her answer, shaped by her experience with Robert, was that caregiving could be both an act of justice and an act of healing. We don't have to forgive them to care for them properly, but caring for them properly might lead us toward forgiveness. Jennifer's children grew up with an unusual understanding of forgiveness and family complexity. They'd witnessed their mother choosing grace over bitterness, compassion over revenge. These lessons shaped how they approached their own relationships and conflicts. Sophia, now studying social work in college, said her mother's story influenced her career choice. "I want to help broken families find healing, like you did with Grandpa Robert." David, more practical, became an advocate for homeless veterans and elderly homeless people. "Grandpa Robert was homeless for years," he explained. "I keep thinking about all the people who walked past him without seeing him. I want to see people." Miguel watched his wife continue to grow and heal from her childhood trauma, amazed by her resilience. "You took something that should have destroyed you and turned it into something beautiful," he told her. "I had help," Jennifer replied, squeezing his hand. "I had you, our kids, and eventually I had the chance to understand my father." Not everyone gets that closure. On the anniversary of Robert's death each year, Jennifer visited his grave, a simple marker she'd purchased with the inscription, "Robert Martinez. Father, may he find in death the peace he couldn't find in life." She would sit there for a while, sometimes talking to him about her life, sometimes just sitting in silence. These visits weren't about obligation or guilt. They were about completion, about honoring the complicated relationship they'd had and the lessons she'd learned. "I'm doing well, Dad," she'd say. "Sophia graduates college next year. David made the basketball team. Miguel and I celebrated our 20th anniversary. The life I built despite your leaving, it's good. I'm happy, and I forgive you. I'll keep forgiving you every time I remember the little girl crying at a rest stop, every time I think about all the years we lost. Forgiveness is a choice I'll keep making because it sets me free." Jennifer's story became somewhat known in her community, and she was sometimes asked to speak at churches or support groups about forgiveness and redemption. She always emphasized the same points. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or excusing. It doesn't mean you trust the person again or let them back into your life to hurt you again. Forgiveness means releasing them from the debt they owe you so that you can be free from carrying that burden. "My father owed me a childhood, a present father, stability, and love. He couldn't repay that debt. He destroyed his own life, trying to escape the guilt of what he'd done to mine. Holding on to my anger wasn't punishing him, it was punishing me. When I chose to forgive him, when I chose to care for him with compassion at the end of his life, I wasn't doing it for him. I was doing it for me. I was choosing freedom over bitterness, healing over perpetual victimhood. These speeches resonated with people who had their own stories of abandonment and hurt. Jennifer received letters and emails from people thanking her for showing them that forgiveness was possible even in the hardest circumstances. One woman wrote, "My father left when I was 10. I've been angry for 40 years. Your story helped me understand that my anger is hurting me more than it's hurting him. I'm going to work on letting it go." Another, "I'm a nursing assistant like you, and I've been assigned to care for my mother who was abusive when I was a child. I've been doing my job, but with so much resentment. Your story reminded me that I can choose compassion without condoning what she did." Jennifer kept these letters, reminded by them that her painful experience had purpose. The abandonment that could have destroyed her had instead taught her about resilience, forgiveness, and the complicated nature of human weakness and redemption. In her work at Sunset Grove, Jennifer saw Roberts everywhere. Broken people who had made terrible choices and were now facing the consequences in their final years. She saw Jennifer's, too, adult children grappling with how to care for parents who had failed them. Her role became helping facilitate healing in these complicated relationships, showing both sides that it was possible to acknowledge hurt while still choosing compassion. "Your father's dementia was a strange gift," Miguel observed one evening. "It stripped away his defenses and forced him to be honest about what he'd done. That honesty made your forgiveness possible." Jennifer nodded. "Without the dementia, he might have kept lying to himself and to me. The disease took everything from him, but it also revealed the truth that needed to be told." 20 years after Robert's death, Jennifer retired from Sunset Grove after a career spanning over 3 decades. At her retirement party, countless former colleagues and grateful families spoke about her impact. "Jennifer taught us that caring for the elderly isn't just about medical needs," one nurse said. "It's about seeing their whole story, understanding their regrets, and helping them find peace before the end." In her retirement speech, Jennifer finally told the full story of finding and caring for her father. Many in the audience were hearing it for the first time, and there wasn't a dry eye in the room. "My father abandoned me when I was 7 years old," Jennifer concluded. "That abandonment could have defined my entire life in negative ways. For a long time it did. But through the strange providence of him being assigned as my patient at the end of his life, I was given a gift, the gift of understanding, of closure, and ultimately of forgiveness. I learned that we're all broken in our own ways. Some of us have the support and strength to manage our brokenness without destroying others. Some of us don't. My father was one of the ones who didn't. But even in his failure, even in his worst choice, he remained human and deserving of basic compassion. That's the lesson I'll carry with me into retirement and that I hope to pass on to my grandchildren. We're all capable of terrible mistakes. We all need grace, and we all have the power to choose healing over bitterness, no matter what's been done to us. My father gave me life twice, once at birth and once at death by teaching me about forgiveness. I'm grateful for both gifts." As Jennifer left Sunset Grove for the last time, walking past room 217, where her journey of understanding had begun, she felt complete. The frightened 7-year-old abandoned at a rest stop had grown into a woman of strength, compassion, and wisdom. She'd taken the worst thing that ever happened to her and transformed it into her greatest teacher. And in doing so, she'd honored both her father's failure and her own resilience, proving that love, even broken, imperfect, regretful love, could find its way to redemption. The story of Jennifer Martinez and Robert Martinez Sullivan became a reminder that healing is possible even in the most damaged relationships, that forgiveness is a gift we give ourselves, and that sometimes the people who hurt us most deeply are simply broken souls doing the best they could with the shattered pieces of their own lives.